Hello and welcome to The Leading Question. I'm your host, Steve Wigreiser. Today we have Deborah Gordon Klehr, Executive Director of the Education Law Center with us. Deborah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I understand you are a lifelong Philadelphian.
I am.
Could you share with us some of your background, please?
Grew up in the area and then came back a year after law school to start at the Education Law Center, and that was a little over 17 years ago, and here we are.
How did you become interested in the law and then public interest law?
I was always very interested in child advocacy, and so my focus area in college was on urban education policy, and I had a lot of summer internships focused on child advocacy. And then when I was getting ready to figure out what to do after college, I had a professor recommend law school as an opportunity to open doors to do education policy. And here we are.
Did the professor mention how hard law school is?
What the professor didn't mention is how hard teaching is, which is actually what I did before law school. So I listened to his advice and applied to law school, but then I deferred so I could have a different perspective from the teaching side. And I taught kindergarten and first grade. And what my roommate then and close friend now will tell you is she would find me on my bed asleep with my backpack still on.
I'm wondering what the takeaways were, what the lessons you learned as an elementary school teacher.
Students learn in different ways, and schools need resources to provide what our students need.
How did you first become involved in the Education Law Center?
Well, I was clerking for a judge in New York, and my husband and I knew we wanted to move back to Philadelphia, and I spoke with a professor from law school who connected me ultimately with the Education Law Center. And there aren't that many organizations nationally, and certainly not in Pennsylvania, that do the work I wanted to do, focused on education law and education policy. In fact, there was one, the Education Law Center, and I was extremely lucky to get a public interest law fellowship to start my career at the Education Law Center.
So you were starting, if I may, at the bottom.
Yes.
And over the years, how many years has it been?
Just over 17.
Okay, you worked your way up, and now you're running the organization.
Yes.
Now, I'm assuming you don't run it on your own. Tell us a little bit about the structure of the Education Law Center.
I'm extremely lucky to work with a team of incredible advocates. We have an office in Philadelphia and we have an office in Pittsburgh, and we have lawyers in both locations. And together we are advocating for access to quality public education for all children in Pennsylvania.
Well, we've been talking about, and I'll call it ELC for a moment just to make it easier, without really describing what it is and what its purposes are. And you've given away most of it, I think, but let's be clear so that our viewers know exactly what the Education Law Center is.
So we're a nonprofit legal advocacy organization, and our mission is to ensure access to quality public education for all children in Pennsylvania. And we do that work focused on underserved student populations, so students in poverty, students of color, students with disabilities, multilingual learners, students in the foster care and juvenile justice systems, LGBTQ youth, students experiencing homelessness, and of course students at the intersection of those identities who face barriers to accessing quality public education.
On a day in and day out basis, what does the organization do?
So we have multiple strategies to advocate. We do direct legal representation. We have a helpline where parents or child-serving professionals, sometimes students, can call us to explain what challenge they're facing, and we provide legal advice or assistance or a referral, or we take the case. And so that's some of our direct representation. We also do impact litigation. We really try to think about how we can change the system and what cases we can take that will not only help the family in front of us, but thousands of families in Philadelphia or across Pennsylvania. So we do impact cases in federal court, in state court, administrative complaints, and we do policy advocacy at the local, state, and federal level. So maybe that's testifying to the school board to say, the dress code policy that you have is disproportionately impacting Black girls and you should stop. Or testifying at the state level to advocate for better laws to protect highly mobile youth, students in the foster care system or students experiencing homelessness or students in the juvenile justice system who may be in many schools and need help making sure that their credits transfer. So we were very pleased to have some legislation passed this past year, Act 1, after 10 years of advocacy, which will really make a difference for highly mobile youth. That's some of our policy advocacy. And then we do community engagement, so trying to listen to the community and center the lived experiences of the students we serve, not just be a bunch of lawyers at our desks figuring out what we should be working on, but listen. And so, for example, we've been doing listening sessions and know your rights trainings with groups of students throughout Philadelphia to hear from the students what are the top issues, and in particular focusing in this case on Black girls and how can we make our schools more welcoming and inclusive. And from those listening sessions, think about what policy changes we want to advocate for together.
I was immediately fascinated by the concept of a hotline. What exactly is it, and what kinds of calls do you get, and then what kind of response are you in a position to give?
So we get about 1,300 calls a year throughout Pennsylvania from parents mostly, but also child-serving professionals, maybe a social worker from DHS, or maybe the lawyer who's representing the student in another type of matter but doesn't have education expertise, who wants some advice on the legal issues around the student's education. And so those issues, it's the beginning of the school year. Right now, those issues might have to do with enrollment. I went to enroll my child, and the school district is requiring X and Y documentation. And we say, that's not what the law says. Here's what the law says.
And so with that advice, hopefully the parent can advocate for the child and get the child enrolled.
Exactly.
But if they're still having difficulty, does the center provide resources in those circumstances?
So in some cases, we may call the school district and say, what you're doing is illegal, please enroll this child. Or in other cases, maybe we would refer the case to another attorney who could take the case, depending on what the issues are. We have a lot of publications. So we just issued our 2022 Back to School Guide. It has over 60 publications and information for parents and child-serving professionals to learn about different areas of the law and rights-based information for students. Everything from students' rights to special education services, to students' rights from being disciplined in school, to students' rights to enroll in school, students' rights when they're experiencing homelessness, etc. And we provide these publications to parents, and often that's enough to help the parent be able to advocate for their child. Sometimes it's not. We may get more involved. We may call the school district. We may refer the case to a private attorney or to a pro bono partner who can help the family.
So you're a nonprofit, but that doesn't necessarily mean, I don't think, that there can't be some sort of fee for service, or maybe I'm wrong about that. So how is that managed? I mean, the average parent who is advocating for their child is not in a position to pay an hourly rate to an attorney.
We don't charge our clients ever, and in fact, most of our clients are all below the poverty line. And so, but we don't charge clients, and we depend on foundations and private donors to support our work to be able to provide this service for the community.
And then if there's a referral to an outside lawyer, then I would take it there would be some understanding about compensation, or am I wrong?
Most of the cases that we take are not fee generating. And so sometimes that makes it hard to place with a private bar, but other times the law firms are willing to take a case and they're not going to get fees from it. They're taking the case pro bono. And we're really lucky to be in a community that has pro bono attorneys willing to take the case and willing to sometimes partner with us and sometimes take the case on their own. We provide trainings for attorneys to be able to know education law and take the case. Sometimes we partner and sometimes we refer.
There are a whole range of problems that parents experience with schools and their kids and their relationship with the schools and other kids in their classes. I just want to get a sense as to the threshold of problems that you'll become involved with, and if you have any practical advice for parents who inevitably will experience some issue with a child in the school as to how to go about it. Do we resolve these things internally before we pick up the phone, or do we attempt to? I know I've asked you a lot of questions, but I'm interested in your response.
Oftentimes when a parent calls us, they have called the school, they have tried to advocate for their student to get the services to which the child is entitled, or perhaps the parent doesn't know the services to which the child is entitled, but they know their child's struggling or not being treated fairly or being bullied or whatever the issues are. And sometimes it does take a call from an attorney to ensure that the student's rights are enforced and met. We saw a lot during the school closures because of COVID. A lot of students with disabilities did not get any services. And so now we are trying to ensure that those students get compensatory services for the time they were not getting the special education services to which they were entitled. Do that individually, but we are also trying to work with districts to ensure that all of the students in the district get the services to which they're entitled.
I've read a little bit about the impact of COVID on the school-age population, but since I don't have kids in school at the present time, they're all grown, I want to ask you that question very generally. I mean, from your perspective, and I know this is a big question, what was the impact, or is the impact going forward, of the entire year and a half or 2-year COVID experience on our school-age kids?
Our children lost out on a lot of education. And at the beginning, here in Philadelphia, students didn't have Chromebooks, or students didn't have technology at home to be able to switch the next day to Zoom. Teachers hadn't been trained on how to do a Zoom breakout room or Google Classroom necessarily. And so we were already behind some of our other suburban peer districts where the students did already have one-to-one. Each student had a device. It took a while to be able to figure out how to get our students devices and then ensure that they had internet access and could be on Wi-Fi. Some families were driving to the parking lot of the school to sit in their car and get the Wi-Fi to access school. There was a huge gap, and it wasn't just Philadelphia. I mean, this was throughout the country, of course, and in Pennsylvania, where I'm most familiar. This was an issue that impacted students in urban areas. It impacted students in rural areas. And since so many of our districts are underfunded, the districts really didn't have the resources to pivot and provide students what they needed to learn in a remote fashion. And we're still seeing those repercussions when our students lost out on so much. And I don't think it was for lack of trying in many cases. I think the teachers would have loved to be able to be in touch with their students right away and teach online. I mean, it's harder, and there were a lot of barriers, but so many of our districts just didn't have those resources to switch right away.
You're getting 1,300 calls a year. You're involved in various litigation in state court and federal court, and we haven't even talked about that yet. How do you fund your organization?
We are funded, like I said, primarily by individual donors and private foundations who believe in our mission and believe that all children should have access to quality public education. So, like I said, we don't charge our clients. We are able to get fees in some small number of our cases, but for the most part, we are dependent on donations. And so I spend a lot of my time meeting with donors and talking about our work and encouraging support so that we can do the work we do. We, I think, do a tremendous amount of work for our community with about 15 or 16 people on staff. And we're really, I feel, lucky to be able to do this work. I feel personally very fortunate to be at the Education Law Center and be able to be an advocate for students. And I wish we were twice as big with twice as big a budget.
Are you limited to a particular geographic area or set of school districts?
We're statewide, and so we have litigated cases throughout the state. We are involved right now in a case against the state for failure to fund public education, and that is on behalf of districts throughout Pennsylvania and students and families and statewide organizations. And because our main office is here in Philadelphia, we do have a large number of cases in greater Philadelphia.
Are there other organizations throughout the state that do at least some of what you do to help shoulder the burden?
We definitely have incredible partners we can work with on some of our larger impact cases. But there's not another organization that's solely focused on education law the way we are, or that has a helpline the way we do. So it's hard when we're priority setting to think about what we're going to say no to, because if we don't take a case, often nobody will.
I did a little bit of research, and I'm willing to be wrong about it, but it looks like there is somewhere between 1.5 million and 2 million K through 12 students in Pennsylvania right now. Am I way off?
I don't think you're way off.
Okay, so that's a lot of kids, all individuals, all with a whole host of issues, potentially, in interfacing with schools and other kids and school districts and teachers. It just seems like an overwhelming amount of work. Let me get a better sense, though, as to those issues that ELC has, at least in the past, considered to be impactful and worthy of litigation.
Well, when we started in 1975, the federal law protecting students with disabilities had just been enacted. And so at the beginning of our time, we were very focused on what does that mean in the Third Circuit? What does that mean in Pennsylvania? What should the state regulations and state laws be that to enforce the federal, or go further than what the federal law said about students with disabilities? And so my predecessors did some incredible advocacy creating that law here in Pennsylvania, both through the courts and also through state level advocacy, to ensure that students with disabilities had access to public education. And then from there, really thinking about intersectional students. So what does that mean for students with disabilities in the foster care system, for example, or for our youngest learners, and ensuring that they had rights. And then we really grew broader than students with disabilities to thinking about other underserved student populations. And so, for example, we do a lot of work around dismantling the school to prison pipeline, and focusing on school climate, where we know that students with disabilities, Black and Brown students, and LGBTQ youth are disproportionately disciplined. Not because they behave differently, but because they are punished differently. And so really unpacking what are the policies and what are the laws locally in Pennsylvania and at the federal level that create a climate where we are disproportionately disciplining students of color, students with disabilities, LGBTQ youth.
So is that the subject of lobbying or policy advocacy, or is that a litigation matter, for example?
All of the above.
Yes.
All of the above. I'll share that one case that I worked on when I was a young lawyer at the Education Law Center. I had a middle school student who found a smashed pencil sharpener on the playground at school and picked it up. And I don't know if you know this, but the inside of a smashed pencil sharpener is a razor blade, because that's how.
Right. As I think back, the last time I sharpened my number 2 pencil for some standardized test,
right.
Yes, there was a blade in there.
So he handed it to his teacher, and the teacher said thank you, and went back to playing kickball or whatever. And then they later tried to transfer him to a disciplinary school for possession of a weapon. So we get these individual cases, and with that we try to change the policies or change the laws. Another case, we had a first grader who had been suspended, I forget the number, but probably 28 times for walking out of the classroom. And the school knew that he had been diagnosed with ADHD, but he did not have an individualized education plan. He didn't have any supports in school, and he would just get up out of his chair and walk out of the classroom. There were no allegations that he threw a chair at a teacher or another kid or anything on his way out. He just walked out of the classroom. And they suspended him every time he walked out. So, we helped that individual family, but we took that case and similar cases and went to the school district and said, stop suspending young children. Something like 94% of the reason that young children were being suspended from school was for misconduct.
What do you think the true reason was?
I think, our class sizes are really large and our schools don't have the resources they need. And so, but I will tell you, it disproportionately impacts students with disabilities and students of color. So we went to the school district with the data and said, stop suspending kindergarten through second graders. And it wasn't just the Education Law Center. We did this with partners. We did this with parents. We did this with other advocacy organizations. And ultimately, the district created a policy to stop suspending young children. And we were successful in Pittsburgh as well. We have not yet been successful at the state level with the state legislature, but hopefully that's work ahead.
So I know that you have an updated handbook, and I know you have other publications. Is there a handbook that gives instruction or guidance to parents of children who have disabilities and who are beginning to enter public education?
There are a lot of resources on our website covering all different topics, so including young children with disabilities, as well as many other topics that our students face in school, whether it's bullying and harassment or suspensions, for example.
Any advice, and I recognize that the school year has probably started everywhere in Pennsylvania, but for parents of kids, particularly the youngest of kids who are starting in public school, based upon everything you've seen and heard.
You have rights. And there are a lot of calls that we get where a parent says, this doesn't sound right to me. And they're right. Their instinct is correct. It's not right. And so students do have rights. There are a lot of laws that protect our students. And then there's some policies that don't. And so there are also opportunities to be an advocate. And we have some information on our website about how to testify at a school board meeting and what your rights are in that context, because there are also opportunities to change what the policies are.
So knowing that you were coming in, I decided to do something that I had not done before. I picked up the Pennsylvania Constitution, and that's unfortunately a rarely taught area in many of our law schools. Of course, we all are familiar with the U.S. Constitution, but I see that our General Assembly is required to provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education to serve the needs of the Commonwealth. So, what does that mean to you?
That is the topic of our lawsuit right now against the state for failure to fund public education under the state constitution.
Okay.
And the General Assembly does have this obligation to create a thorough and efficient system, and they're not. And we sued the state almost 8 years ago, on behalf of school districts and parents and two statewide organizations, the Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools and the NAACP State Conference, Pennsylvania. And our lawsuit is under both that education clause as well as the equal protection provisions, because the state is not doing its job. And during trial, we had 29 witnesses testify for us. We combined, there were 40 witnesses, 15,000 pages of trial testimony over a 4-month period. And what we showed in that case is how our students and schools do not have what they need because the General Assembly is not doing its job. And so we heard from We heard from a history teacher, a middle school history teacher, who talked about how the textbook she had to use, the last president in that textbook, Bill Clinton. We heard from that same school district about the kindergarten with 75 kids sharing one toilet. We heard about an elementary school with 1,200 students in it, many of whom did not have pre-K, coming to school with 2 reading specialists for 1,200 elementary school students. So we believe that this case will define what thorough and efficient means in Pennsylvania, but it's quite clear from the testimony presented that it is not what we have now. And it's not just a Philadelphia issue. We did have representatives from the School District of Philadelphia testify, but we had school districts throughout the Commonwealth, rural, urban, suburban, on all sides, all parts of the state testify. This is an issue impacting most of our school districts who do not have what they need to provide what our students should be getting. Thorough and efficient has not been defined in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. However, many other states have similar state education clauses. And so one thing we can learn from Pennsylvania being late in the game of having this court decision come out is we can learn from other states. And we can learn from other states several things. A, what does that clause mean? And B, does it work to invest in education? And guess what? Money matters. Schools are funded through a combination of state dollars, local dollars, and a small amount of federal dollars. Ratio of state dollars versus local dollars is one of the main issues at play here in Pennsylvania because we are so overly reliant in Pennsylvania on local share as opposed to state share that results in local wealth and local tax capacity determining the quality of your school. So it's a state choice, and the state has decided not to fund school districts at an adequate level. And so some districts can tax themselves locally and generate more dollars locally to support their schools. Many school districts, like the petitioner school districts in our case, tax themselves at a very high rate, but tax effort is high, tax capacity is low. They don't have property values to support the generation of wealth that their districts need. And so unfortunately, and I think unconstitutionally, your zip code determines the quality of your education. And as a result, our students are not graduating college and career ready because their school districts don't have what they need. In most other states, the state is providing a larger share than the local. In Pennsylvania, that's reversed. And so it's a very regressive system where we are so reliant on local wealth. And that results in situations where our schools don't have libraries or music or art or guidance counselors or technology or infrastructure. We had lots of testimony about leaky buildings and mold and et cetera. And so again, that is a huge challenge for us in Philadelphia, and it is a huge challenge throughout the Commonwealth. This is a problem for our entire community. We want our students to be college and career ready. It's good for the economy, it's good for our community, and frankly, it's a legal right. And so I think meeting with your legislator is a great opportunity to talk about why you believe in public education, and to say that you do want to see an increase in basic education funding. You want to see an increase in special education funding. You want to see an increase in Level Up, which is a new funding line item focused on driving dollars to the 100 districts furthest from adequacy, so our poorest school districts. And so talking to legislators about the importance of increasing funding for basic education funding, special education funding, et cetera, is a great opportunity to explain why you believe in public education. And again, the legislature does not need to wait for a decision from the court. I really believe that through our fair funding advocacy, we have the ability to change the trajectory for generations of children in Pennsylvania.
Well, I wish you the best with all that you're doing. I thank you for coming here onto the show. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in to The Leading Question. We'll see you next time.